It began with desperation. The year was 1940, and Britain stood alone. France had fallen. The Luftwaffe darkened the skies over London, and Hitler's armies stretched from the Arctic Circle to the Pyrenees. Yet in this moment of crisis, Prime Minister Winston Churchill issued an order that would redefine modern warfare, set Europe ablaze. From that call came the birth of a new type of soldier, the British Commando. These were not regular infantrymen. They were volunteers drawn from across the services, sailors, Royal Marines, and soldiers who craved action when the rest of the British Army was retreating. Training began at a remote outpost in the Scottish Highlands, Achnacarry Castle near Fort William. Here, under the cold rain and biting wind, the earliest commandos learned to climb cliffs, cross rivers, and strike hard before vanishing. The motto was simple: united we conquer. Their training was brutal by design. Men were woken before dawn, forced into icy rivers, and made to march miles with full packs before breakfast. Obstacle courses were run with live ammunition. A single mistake could be fatal, but it forged a new kind of warrior: quick, quiet, and utterly ruthless. These men were to be Churchill's answer to Blitzkrieg, lightning raids for a lightning war. By late 1940, the idea of the Commando had become a reality. The newly formed units, number 1 through number 11 Commando, began planning small-scale attacks along the coasts of occupied Europe. The goal was twofold: gather intelligence and remind Hitler that the British were not finished. But the first attempts were clumsy, improvised affairs. Poor navigation, bad weather, and inexperience led to abortive landings and heavy casualties. Still, lessons were learned. Major General Dudley Clark, the man credited with conceiving the Commando concept, summarized their purpose in a single sentence: they are hunters, not soldiers, men who come by night to strike and disappear. The command structure reflected that philosophy. Small, highly trained groups operated independently, often with minimal support. Their success depended on stealth, discipline, and audacity, qualities that would soon define them in legend. By 1941, British intelligence identified a target that could test this new force: the Lofoten Islands, off Norway's northwestern coast. German occupation forces were using the island's fish oil factories to produce glycerin, a critical component in explosives. More importantly, German naval traffic through the area offered a chance to capture codebooks or radio materials. The mission would become known as Operation Claymore, and it would mark the Commando's first real triumph. But the challenge was immense. The islands were deep inside the Arctic Circle, battered by fierce winds and cloaked in near-constant winter darkness. Any mistake would leave the raiders stranded hundreds of miles from safety, with no hope of rescue. Still, morale among the commandos was high. Many saw it as a chance to strike back after the humiliations of Dunkirk and Norway. As preparations began, secrecy was paramount. Even the men involved knew little beyond their immediate objectives. Training intensified: demolitions, shipboarding drills, and hand-to-hand combat. The Royal Navy assembled a small flotilla of destroyers and troop transports, disguised to resemble fishing trawlers. The stage was set for Britain's first real blow against Nazi Germany since the evacuation of Dunkirk. In the weeks leading up to the operation, Churchill personally monitored the planning. "These raids," he wrote, "may seem small in scope, but they are mighty in spirit." It was more than rhetoric. He understood that each successful strike would chip away at German confidence and boost Allied morale. A successful commando raid could accomplish politically what 1,000 bombs could not. As March 1941 approached, the weather over the North Sea turned treacherous. Freezing winds, towering waves, and snow squalls that reduced visibility to almost nothing. Yet for the commandos of Nosman 3 and 4 units, it was perfect cover. They sailed from Scapa Flow under total radio silence, their decks slick with ice. Each man carried his kit, explosives, and a single rifle, their lifeline in the dark. Somewhere amid that howling Arctic sea, one commando wrote in his diary, "We are ghosts of the Empire now. We come in the night, and we leave nothing but ashes." His words captured the spirit of the men who would soon carve their place in history. By dawn, the ships would reach the Norwegian coast, and the first true commando raid of the war would begin. But for now, as the destroyers cut through the black water, none could know what awaited them on those frozen islands, or how a single raid would reveal secrets that could turn the tide of war. The Commandos had been born from desperation. In a few hours, the world would learn just how dangerous desperate men could be. The date was March 4th, 1941. As the Arctic sun struggled to rise above the horizon, 4 British destroyers emerged from the mist near the Lofoten Islands off the coast of Norway. On board were over 500 men of No. 3 and No. 4 Commando, supported by engineers, Royal Navy gunners, and intelligence officers from the recently formed Combined Operations Headquarters. The mission was codenamed Operation Claymore, a lightning strike against German-held territory designed to send a clear message: Britain still had teeth. The target was the small fishing town of Svolvær and surrounding villages, where German forces had established factories to extract fish oil and glycerin, vital ingredients in explosives production. Destroying them would cripple local supply to the German war machine. But the Commandos had another, more secret goal: to capture enemy documents, codes, and possibly even an Enigma machine, if they could find one. At 4:30 a.m., under cover of fog and silence, the men climbed into landing craft. The sea was freezing, waves slapping the sides of the boats as they pushed toward shore. When they hit the beaches, the Commandos moved swiftly. Explosives experts set charges, while assault teams stormed the factories and power stations. The German garrison, taken completely by surprise, offered minimal resistance. Within an hour, the town was under British control. Local Norwegians, who had suffered under occupation for almost a year, poured into the streets. They cheered the Commandos, bringing food, maps, and intelligence on German movements. It was like seeing daylight for the first time, one local woman recalled decades later. We thought Britain had forgotten us. Then they arrived, and we knew the fight was not over. The Commandos went to work with ruthless efficiency. Factory machinery was destroyed, fuel stores set ablaze, and ammunition depots blown sky high. Over 10 factories producing glycerin and fish oil were demolished in less than 3 hours. Plumes of black smoke rose over the fjords, visible for miles. But amid the chaos, a separate team led by Lieutenant Dennis Vernon made a discovery that would have far greater impact than any explosion. In the office of a German trawler company, Vernon's team found a locked safe. Inside were codebooks, signal logs, and crucially, rotor settings for a German Enigma machine. The documents were immediately secured and sent back with the returning ships. At the time, few on the ground understood their significance. But months later, those very papers would help Bletchley Park's cryptanalysts break a new German naval cipher. Operation Claymore, once viewed as a minor raid, had quietly changed the intelligence war. By late morning, the Commandos began their withdrawal. The Royal Navy signaled for extraction as German aircraft began to appear on radar. Over 225 German prisoners and 60 collaborators were taken aboard the ships, along with nearly 300 Norwegian volunteers who wished to continue fighting with the Free Norwegian forces in Britain. As the flotilla slipped back into the North Sea, behind them the Lofoten Islands burned, a beacon of defiance in enemy territory. The return journey was tense. Luftwaffe bombers hunted the fleet through snow squalls and heavy seas. Yet the destroyers evaded detection, reaching Scapa Flow on March 6th without a single casualty. When news of the raid broke, Churchill hailed it as a triumph of precision and daring. Across occupied Europe, the raid had an electrifying effect. The Germans, shaken by the suddenness of the attack, diverted troops and coastal defences to Norway, an overreaction that would later prove strategically costly. But beneath the public celebration, questions remained. Intelligence officers at Bletchley Park noticed that some of the recovered documents bore the markings of the Kriegsmarine's most secret divisions. Who had been responsible for storing them on a remote fishing island? Were the Germans using the Arctic coast as a covert relay for naval communications? And how close had the Commandos come to uncovering something even greater? Perhaps even an Enigma machine itself. In his report, Rear Admiral L.E.H. Maund, who oversaw the naval component, wrote, "The operation succeeded beyond expectation. Yet one feels we may have touched only the edge of something larger." His words hinted at a deeper mystery, one that British intelligence would quietly pursue for months. For the Commandos, Claymore was a proving ground. It showed that small, well-trained units could strike deep into enemy territory, inflict damage, and return unharmed. It also demonstrated the psychological power of such raids, to unsettle, confuse, and force the enemy to overreact. but it left behind unanswered questions in the frozen ruins of the Lofoten's. Questions about coded signals, missing documents, and the true purpose of the German presence there. As the smoke over the Norwegian coast faded, Churchill demanded more. "We must not let them rest," he told his staff. "Let the enemy feel the weight of the hunter's hand." The next target would be far deadlier, a heavily fortified port on the French Atlantic coast, where the Commandos would attempt one of the most daring operations in the entire war. It would become known as the Saint-Nazaire Raid, and it would push the limits of courage, planning, and sacrifice beyond anything the British Commandos had ever faced. It was the night of March 27, 1942. A convoy of 16 British ships, including a single American-built destroyer stripped down and packed with explosives, sliced through the dark waters of the Bay of Biscay. Their destination was Saint-Nazaire, a heavily fortified port on the French Atlantic coast. The mission's codename was Operation Chariot, and its goal was audacious, almost suicidal: destroy the massive Normandy dock, the only facility on the western coast capable of servicing the German battleship Tirpitz. The destroyer, HMS Campbelltown, led the flotilla. Once a worn-out relic of World War I, it had been disguised to resemble a German Moer-class vessel. Deep within her hull, engineers had packed 4 tons of delayed-action explosives, hidden behind layers of concrete. Her task was simple: ram the dock gates at full speed and deliver her deadly cargo. Time fuses were set for detonation several hours after impact, giving the assault teams enough time to complete their missions and, hopefully, escape. On board were 6 WWII men, a mix of Royal Navy sailors and elite British commandos from No. 2 Commando and supporting units. Their commander, Lieutenant Colonel Charles Newman, was calm but clear-eyed. "This," he told his men during the final briefing, "will be the greatest raid of them all. The odds are against us, but the results, if we succeed, may shorten this war." The approach was perilous. The estuary of the Loire River, leading to Saint-Nazaire, was mined and lined with German gun batteries. Yet fortune favoured them. British intelligence had obtained German naval recognition signals, which they used to deceive the coastal defences for just long enough to get within striking distance. But at 1:22 a.m., a German searchlight sliced across the darkness, and the ruse collapsed. The sky erupted. Flak, tracer rounds, and machine gun fire tore into the night. Campbelltown, now fully illuminated, charged ahead under a hail of fire. Her helmsman, Lieutenant Commander Stephen Beatty, pushed the throttles to full. Bullets ripped through the bridge. Crewmen fell where they stood. Yet Beatty held his course. At 1:34 a.m., with a thunderous crash, Campbelltown rammed the dock gates at over 20 knots. The impact sent a shudder through the ship and the surrounding harbour. She was in. Within moments, Commando assault teams poured ashore, spreading out through the dockyard to demolish pumping stations, powerhouses, and gun emplacements. Each man carried a 40-pound pack of explosives and a rifle. The fighting was fierce and chaotic. German troops rushed in from nearby barracks, turning the docks into a maze of fire and confusion. The Commandos fought street by street, setting charges as they went, then regrouping at the waterfront for evacuation. For many, the extraction never came. Several motor launches meant to pick them up had been destroyed by gunfire. Newman realized the situation was collapsing and gave the order to break out toward the countryside. "Every man for himself," he said quietly. "Get as far as you can." Small groups scattered into the shadows, hunted by German patrols through the ruins of the port. Some reached the outskirts. Others were captured or killed in desperate last stands. At 10 a.m. the following morning, as German officers and curious dock workers examined the wrecked Campbelltown, the hidden fuses finally reached their mark. The explosion tore through the ship and the dock gates with catastrophic force. Over 250 Germans were killed instantly. The Normandy dock was rendered completely unusable for the remainder of the war. The blast was so powerful, it flung debris hundreds of meters and sent a column of water and steel into the air. It was, by every measure, a victory, but a bitter one. Of the 611 men who set out, 169 were killed and 215 captured. Only a handful made it back to England. Lieutenant Commander Beatty and Colonel Newman were taken prisoner, later receiving the Victoria Cross for their leadership. The raid's devastation shocked the Germans, who reportedly believed it the work of saboteurs still operating in the area. For days, searchlights swept the skies and patrols scoured the ruins, convinced more explosions were coming. In the aftermath, German engineers tried to calculate how such a small force could achieve so much destruction. One of them, writing later in his diary, called it a masterstroke of terror and deception. The message was clear. Nowhere, not even behind the Atlantic Wall, was safe from the reach of the commandos. Yet amid the glory and the medals, some mysteries lingered. A few of the commando teams never reported back, their fates unconfirmed. Intelligence files recovered decades later mention intercepted German transmissions referring to special prisoners taken after the raid. Men believed to have knowledge of secret explosives or code devices. Their identities remain uncertain to this day. Operation Chariot was the most destructive commando raid of the war and one of the most costly, but it changed everything. Hitler, humiliated by the assault, ordered the strengthening of every coastal port from Norway to Spain, a massive diversion of men and materials that would later weaken his defences elsewhere. For the commandos, Saint Nazaire was proof of concept. Audacity could triumph where armies could not. Yet as survivors returned home to quiet debriefings, they were already hearing whispers of the next missions, new raids that would push even deeper into enemy territory. Norway would once again become a target, and this time, the stakes would include not just factories and ships, but the balance of power in the North Atlantic itself. By late 1942, the British commandos had become a symbol of defiance, ghosts that haunted the German-occupied coasts of Europe. Their audacious strikes in Norway and France had forced Hitler to divert tens of thousands of troops to coastal defences, but the Allies were not finished. Churchill wanted more pressure, more confusion, more fear. The next phase of this shadow war would unfold once again in the icy fjords of Norway, under the codenames Operation Anklet and Operation Archery. The raids were part of a broader Allied strategy, known as the Northern Distraction. While plans for a major invasion in North Africa were underway, the goal in Norway was simple: tie down German forces and destroy supply lines to prevent reinforcements from reaching other fronts. Yet these operations had another motive: to test new commando coordination with the Royal Navy and the Royal Air Force, and to assess German radar and response times in Arctic conditions. Operation Anklet came first. On December 26, 1941, a small force of British commandos and Norwegian troops landed on the Lofoten Islands once again, this time on the island of Moskenesoya. The objective was limited: destroy German installations, seize communications equipment, and capture enemy personnel. The raid went largely unopposed. The Germans, expecting an assault farther south, were caught off guard. Over 200 prisoners were taken, supplies destroyed, and valuable intelligence gathered on German convoy routes. The commandos withdrew before dawn, leaving behind smouldering fuel tanks and a shaken garrison. But the larger and far more dramatic operation came the very next day. Operation Archery. December 27, 1941. The target, the Norwegian coastal town of Vågsøy, near the city of Moløy, was a hub of German activity. Warehouses, barracks, and fish oil plants had been converted to support the German war machine. The garrison numbered over 150, supported by coastal artillery and machine gun positions. The British would attack from the sea and air simultaneously, a true combined arms raid, unlike anything attempted before. As dawn broke, the Norwegian winter sky erupted in flames. RAF bombers swept low over the town, blasting German positions and cutting power lines. Moments later, landing craft surged toward the beaches, filled with over 600 commandos of No. 3 Unit and detachments from the Royal Engineers. Among them was Captain Martin Linge, a Norwegian officer leading his countrymen in exile, determined to strike a blow against the occupiers of his homeland. The fighting in Vågsøy was ferocious. German troops, some veterans of the Eastern Front, counterattacked from stone houses overlooking the harbour. Commandos advanced street by street, clearing each building with grenades and Bren gunfire. Smoke and snow mixed in the freezing air as civilians huddled in cellars, praying for survival. Captain Linge was killed, leading an assault on a machine gun nest. His body later found beside several fallen German soldiers. His courage would make him a legend in Norway, and his name a symbol of resistance. By midday, the commandos had secured the town. Explosive teams set charges on warehouses filled with oil drums, ammunition, and food supplies. The Royal Navy's destroyers, including HMS Onslow and HMS Oribi, shelled German reinforcements attempting to cross from nearby islands. Within hours, WWII was in flames, 18,000 tons of supplies destroyed, several ships sunk, and key radar equipment seized. As the commandos withdrew under air cover, German aircraft from Trondheim and Stavanger scrambled to intercept. A fierce dogfight erupted over the fjords, Spitfires and Hurricanes against Messerschmitt Bf 109s. The British lost 2 aircraft, the Germans 6. The fleet returned to Scapa Flow battered but victorious. The tactical results were undeniable. The raid had crippled local German operations and forced Berlin to deploy another 30,000 troops to Norway's coast. Yet behind the public triumph, the War Office noted something troubling. Intelligence intercepts suggested that the German reaction had been far more intense than expected. Radio messages from occupied Norway mentioned an unusual level of priority from the Kriegsmarine, High Command, as if the commandos had stumbled upon something they weren't meant to see. One declassified report from Combined Operations, dated January 1942, reads, "Reconnaissance photographs show substantial German construction activity in the WWII area after the raid, particularly near radar and communications sites. The scale of the buildup exceeds normal coastal defense measures." To this day, historians debate what the British may have uncovered. A prototype radar system, secret naval signals infrastructure. The documents remain partially redacted. For the commandos who took part, the cost was high but bearable. 17 killed, 53 wounded, and over 120 Germans dead or captured. Yet the psychological effect on both sides was profound. For Norway's occupied citizens, it was a spark of hope. For the Germans, it was a warning that the sea itself had become a British weapon. As the battered ships returned to Britain, Churchill issued a private message of praise. "These are the blows that make giants stumble." But even as the commandos celebrated, the next mission was already being planned, one that would push the limits of precision, stealth, and intelligence gathering. It would not aim to destroy factories or docks, but to seize a single, priceless piece of enemy technology, hidden on a cliff above the French coast. That mission would be codenamed Operation Biting, the Bruneval Raid, and it would test every lesson the commandos had learned so far, while uncovering secrets that would change the course of the air war itself. It was February 27, 1942. The wind howled over the cliffs of Bruneval, a small French coastal village northeast of Le Havre. Below, the English Channel churned in icy darkness. Above those cliffs, nestled in a fortified compound, stood one of the most advanced pieces of German technology yet encountered, a Würzburg radar installation, part of the Reich's secret early warning network. The British called the mission to capture it Operation Biting. Its objective, steal a piece of the radar and bring it home. By this point in the war, British aircraft losses were climbing rapidly. German radar, the Luftwaffe's unseen weapon, was directing deadly accurate intercepts over occupied Europe. British scientists, led by physicist R.V. Jones, suspected that the key to defeating it lay in understanding how the Würzburg worked. But getting close enough to one was almost impossible, until photo reconnaissance revealed one perched dangerously close to the sea near Bruneval. It was heavily guarded by Wehrmacht troops, yet accessible by parachute and extraction by sea. The plan was risky, but irresistible. The raiding force, drawn from C Company, 2nd Battalion of the newly formed 1st Airborne Division, was hand-picked for skill and nerve. Their commander, Major John Frost, a name that would later become legendary at Arnhem, was meticulous and calm. "This isn't a raid," he told his men during briefing. "It's a surgical theft." Frost's commandos would parachute onto the cliffs under cover of darkness, dismantle the radar, and retreat to the beach for extraction by the Royal Navy. To ensure success, the operation was split into 3 groups, one to secure the radar site, another to hold the perimeter against counterattack, and a third to clear the escape route to the beach. They trained in secret on the Scottish coast, using replica radar stations built from photographs. Each man memorized his role down to the second. The timing had to be flawless. At 10:00 p.m. on February 27th, RAF Whitley bombers took off from southern England, carrying 120 paratroopers across the channel. 2 hours later, they jumped into the night, descending silently through sleet and wind. Most landed within 500 yards of the target, a remarkable achievement for a nighttime drop. Within minutes, Frost's men surrounded the radar compound, cutting telephone wires and neutralizing sentries. The element of surprise was total. Sergeant C.W.H. Cox led the technical team to the Würzburg itself, a massive 10-foot dish bristling with delicate components. Under the guidance of RAF radar expert Flight Sergeant Charles Cox, no relation, they began dismantling key sections of the antenna, removing the receiver and transmitter units. Each piece was packed carefully into containers for transport. "Work like surgeons," Cox whispered. Not a scratch, but time was running out. German reinforcements were already moving toward Bruneval, alerted by the sounds of sporadic gunfire. Frost's men fought off probing attacks, using grenades and Brens to cover the technicians. The night erupted into chaos. In the confusion, several paratroopers were cut off, their flares seen briefly from the cliffs before fading into darkness. Whether captured or killed, no one could say. By 2:15 a.m., the main group reached the beach, signaling with Aldis lamps toward the sea. Minutes later, dark shapes appeared through the surf. Royal Navy landing craft commanded by Lieutenant Commander Nigel Clogstown Wilmot of the Combined Operations Pilotage Parties. The men splashed through waist-deep water, hauling their crates of German technology aboard. Behind them, the cliffs flickered with tracer fire as Frost's rearguard held off the advancing Germans. When the boats pulled away, the operation's fate hung in silence. No one spoke. Only when the radar crates were safely loaded onto the destroyer HMS Prince Leopold did Frost allow himself a thin smile. That, he said quietly, was worth the trouble. Back in England, the captured equipment was rushed to the telecommunications research establishment at Malvern. Within days, British scientists confirmed the treasure's worth. The Würzburg operated on a 560 MHz frequency, with precision tracking capabilities far beyond expectations. This discovery led directly to the development of window, strips of aluminum, foil used to jam radar, a tactic that would save thousands of Allied lives during later bombing raids, but not all. The men of Bruneval returned. Reports from French resistance contacts later indicated that 3 paratroopers had been captured alive and transported to a Gestapo facility near Rouen. Their names, Privates Tilly, Corbett and McPherson, appear in operational logs, but their ultimate fate remains unknown. Some intelligence officers believed the Germans may have suspected the true value of what had been taken and sought retribution. Their disappearance became one of several small but haunting mysteries. Of the Commando War, Operation Biting was hailed as one of the most precise and successful raids of World War II. It combined the expertise of the airborne, Navy, and commandos in a seamless, coordinated strike that struck deep into enemy territory and escaped unscathed. Churchill called it a model of scientific warfare. Yet in the corridors of the War Office, analysts noted something darker, a pattern. Each successful raid revealed not only German weaknesses but deeper layers of their defenses, as if every victory peeled back another secret. For Frost and his men, the Bruneval raid was both triumph and omen. It proved that Britain could strike anywhere, even into the heart of the German radar shield, but it also signaled that the enemy was adapting. The Germans quickly reinforced their radar stations with heavier defenses, concrete bunkers, and even decoy installations. The shadow war of technology and intelligence had entered a new phase. As Frost debriefed in England, his mind was already on future battles. Airborne assaults on larger scales, greater risks, higher stakes. The Commandos' war was evolving, and their next missions would take them into occupied Europe itself, towards sabotage, deception, and the hidden operations that would shape D-Day. Yet for those who had fought at Bruneval, the echoes of that cold February night and the men who never came back would linger like ghosts on the wind. By 1945, the Commandos had become legends, their green berets and lightning raids inspiring fear across Nazi-occupied Europe. From the fjords of Norway to the beaches of Normandy, their story was one of audacity and sacrifice. Yet behind their celebrated victories lay a shadowed record. Dozens of missions whose details were buried under wartime secrecy and post-war silence. This final chapter of their war is not only about triumphs, but about the enduring mystery surrounding those who fought, disappeared, and reshaped the future of special operations forever. The Commandos' war had begun in desperation, but by its end, it had transformed Britain's military doctrine. Their successes, in the Lofoten Islands, Saint Nazaire, Vogsoy, and Bruneval, proved that small, elite units could achieve what divisions could not. The strategy of surgical strikes, as Churchill once called them, had changed everything. No longer were armies bound to vast fronts and grinding attrition. The commandos showed that precision, speed, and shock could turn the tide. Their influence would later be seen in the formation of the Special Air Service, the Special Boat Service, and the Royal Marine Commandos, forces that still trace their ethos back to those first desperate days of 1940. But for many of the men who survived, the victories carried scars, both visible and hidden. Sergeant Bill Millen, the famed piper of the Commandos, once said, "We won battles in minutes, but spent lifetimes trying to forget them." Reports declassified decades later revealed that many commandos suffered severe psychological strain, the relentless cycle of violence and secrecy leaving its toll. Theirs was a war fought in silence, often without recognition, and sometimes without record. As the Allies advanced through France and the Low Countries in 1944, commando units took on new roles: sabotage, reconnaissance, and counterintelligence. In Operation Overlord, they spearheaded landings at Sword and Juno beaches, clearing bunkers and leading assaults on German fortifications. Their precision and ferocity opened vital corridors inland, but these operations were far from the dramatic raids of earlier years. Now, their work was one of endurance, street fighting, bridge seizures, and nighttime infiltration behind enemy lines. Yet even here, traces of the earlier mystery remained. One such mission, Operation Copperhead, was designed to deceive the Germans into believing General Montgomery was far from Normandy in the weeks before D-Day. Commandos worked in deep disguise, shadowing a lookalike actor posing as Monty in Gibraltar. The deception succeeded, but files indicate that several operatives involved in its planning vanished during post-war demobilization. Their names struck from official records without explanation. Historians still debate whether these were clerical errors or deliberate redactions tied to later Cold War intelligence work. By May 1945, when Germany finally surrendered, the commandos' role in Europe was drawing to a close. Many returned home quietly, their missions classified and unspoken. Others were sent east to Burma and Malaya, where they continued the fight against Japan. Their methods had evolved from coastal raids to counterinsurgency and jungle warfare, laying the groundwork for the unconventional wars of the next century. Yet, as peace settled over Europe, questions began to surface about what had truly happened during those chaotic final months. In the archives of the War Office, a memorandum dated August 1945 refers cryptically to lost records pertaining to special operations, Norway and France 1942-1943. Among them, several pages related to missing commando teams, the same units that had participated in the Lofoten and Bruneval raids. The memo suggests that certain intelligence objectives were achieved, but remain sensitive due to subsequent research value. To this day, what research value meant remains classified under the Official Secrets Act. For the men who served, such secrecy was both a burden and a badge of honor. Few spoke openly of their missions even decades later. Lieutenant Colonel Charles Newman, hero of St. Nazaire, simply said, "We did what was asked, and we left nothing behind." Yet the unspoken stories, those who were never accounted for, the files sealed indefinitely, gave rise to a quiet mythology within military circles. Were some commandos captured and forced into secret German programs? Did British intelligence conceal post-raid interrogations that revealed more than they intended? The truth remains tangled in wartime fog. As the world rebuilt, so too did the image of the commando. They became more than soldiers. They became a symbol of courage under impossible odds. Their tactics inspired future generations of special operators, from the SAS in the Falklands to modern counter-terror units around the world. The lessons of their raids, meticulous planning, total secrecy, and overwhelming precision became the foundation of modern asymmetric warfare. Yet perhaps their greatest legacy lies not in the battles they fought, but in the mysteries they left behind. The missing men of St. Nazaire, the vanished paratroopers of Bruneval, the sealed archives of Norway, all fragments of a story still incomplete. In every corner of the war, from the frozen fjords to the French coast, traces of their operations linger: rusted shell casings, sunken ships, and unmarked graves that whisper of heroism and silence. The British Commandos were born in a moment of fear and ended in a blaze of triumph. They reshaped the very meaning of warfare, and in doing so, left behind a legacy shrouded in both glory and secrecy. Their audacity was unmatched, their courage unquestioned, their story unfinished. And even now, as historians unseal classified files and revisit the coasts they once raided, one question remains: how much of the Commandos' war do we truly know, and how much still lies hidden beneath the tides of history?